Israel asserts control over the Syrian Golan buffer zone and operates a multi-front military strategy. The Syrian flag flies over Syria's embassy in Moscow and leadership changes quickly unfold. And the UN Security Council meets today for urgent talks on Syria's stability. Hello, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock at Cairo local time, and you're now watching Q News. We begin today's bulletin, of course, with the latest developments in Syria. The Israeli occupation army has asserted that its control over the buffer zone in the Golan Heights and Syria's Jabal al-Sheikh is crucial for ensuring Israel's security. According to Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, Israel is now engaged on 4 active fronts, driven by recent military operations along the Syrian border and in the Golan Heights. He noted that Israeli forces, including infantry, armored units, engineering teams and artillery, are operating inside Syria, supported by air, naval and intelligence divisions. Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's seizure of the demilitarized zone along the Syrian border and nearby strategic locations, describing it as an occupation of Syrian land and a blatant violation of Syrian sovereignty. That came in the Egyptian Foreign Ministry statement, where it emphasized that this action contravenes the 1974 disengagement agreement and international law, undermining Syria's territorial integrity. Egypt accuses Israel of exploiting the current instability in Syria to impose new realities on the ground. Egypt urges the UN Security Council and international powers to act decisively to ensure Syria's sovereignty over its entire territory. The Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, has stated that the Israeli forces' limited and temporary presence in Syria aims to safeguard Israel. Saar stressed the need to protect Syria's minorities, halt attacks, and highlighted deadlocked negotiations regarding detainees. Israel has sent forces into the demilitarized zone created by a 1974 agreement.
Realistic. And we will follow their steps, and we will follow.
Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has instructed the Israeli army to complete its control over the buffer zone in Syria and key observation points following the occupation of Jabal al-Sheikh and other areas. Katz also called for creating a strategic weapons-free zone beyond the buffer zone in southern Syria, claiming such weapons pose a threat to Israel. He emphasized ongoing operations to destroy heavy strategic weapons across Syria, including air-to-surface missiles, air defense systems, surface-to-surface missiles, cruise missiles, long-range rockets, and coastal missiles. Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi stressed that any Israeli incursion into Syrian territory constitutes a breach of international law. Safadi reaffirmed Jordan's support for a Syrian-led political solution and its commitment to maintaining Syria's stability and security. The Kremlin has announced that Russian President Vladimir Putin has decided to grant asylum to President Bashar al-Assad with his family. While the Kremlin noted that Putin has no immediate plans to meet Assad, it described the next phase in Syria as challenging due to instability. The Kremlin also plans to discuss the future of Russian bases in Syria with the country's new authorities. Meanwhile, Iraq's Presidential Council and State Administration Coalition has emphasized the importance of bolstering security along the Iraqi-Syrian border. The meeting highlighted support for government measures to protect border stability, preserve Syria's unity, and respect its sovereignty. They called for a roadmap to define Iraq-Syria relations and endorsed dialogue aimed at drafting a pluralistic constitution that guarantees rights for all Syrian factions. The Washington Post has reported that the United States is considering delisting Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from its terrorist organizations to promote stability in Syria. An American official cited in the report said the move is under serious evaluation, including HTS's independence from Turkey. The Syrian flag has been raised over the Syrian embassy in Moscow, signaling a new chapter in the country's leadership. Russian media reported that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad fled to Moscow with his family after opposition groups advanced into Damascus. The Kremlin announced plans to hold discussions with Syria's new leadership regarding the nation's future. The Kremlin has stated it is too early to determine the future of Russia's military bases in Syria. That came after Bashar al-Assad's flight to Russia. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov noted ongoing efforts to ensure security and communication with relevant parties. Russia's Haimim air base and Tartus naval facility, vital for Mediterranean operations, remain under scrutiny. US President Joe Biden has announced that the United States will collaborate with partners in Syria to manage risks and seize opportunities. Speaking at the White House, Biden confirmed US support for Syria's neighbors during the transition and stressed that al-Assad should be held accountable. He noted that Syria is in a period of uncertainty.
At long last, the Assad regime has fallen.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has expressed support for Syrians seeking a peaceful future. Scholz emphasized the possibility of a national dialogue, orderly transition, and political solution to the conflict. Speaking in Berlin, Scholz stated that Germany, alongside international partners and in line with UN Security Council resolutions, would contribute to this effort. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called on the Syrian people to seize the opportunity for peace after 14 years of war. He emphasized that Syria's future should be determined by Syrians with the support of Special Envoy Geir Pedersen. Guterres urged a peaceful political transition and respect for human rights, highlighting the need for international support. He also stressed the importance of preserving Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity while honoring those affected by the conflict. Pedersen echoed calls for protecting civilians and institutions.
Protect civilians and preserve public institutions. Let me urge all Syrians to prioritize dialogue, unity, and respect for international humanitarian law.
China's foreign ministry has called for a swift political solution in Syria. She added that the political solution aims to restore stability after armed groups seized the capital and the president fled to Russia. The spokesperson, Mao Ning, urged all parties to prioritize the Syrian people's interests, emphasizing China's close monitoring of the situation during a regular briefing. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has stated that his country aims to ensure Syrian migrants return safely and support Syria's reconstruction. Addressing Turkish ambassadors, Fidan emphasized Turkey's vision for a harmonious Syria Ankara expressed readiness to assist its southern neighbour in achieving stability. The UN Security Council is to convene for an emergency session on the situation in Syria today, following the fall of Assad's regime. The emergency session, called by Russia, will be held behind closed doors as world and regional powers call for stability in the civil war-wrecked Middle Eastern country. The United Arab Emirates Foreign Ministry has said that it is closely monitoring the ongoing developments in Syria. In a statement, the ministry urged all Syrian parties to exercise wisdom at this critical juncture in Syria's history, emphasizing the need for actions that fulfill the aspirations and ambitions of all segments of the Syrian population. So, with all this going on, Israel's actions in Syria's Golan Heights intensify, sparking international criticism and geopolitical concerns.
Tensions have escalated in Syria as Israeli military activities intensify in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights and beyond. Reports reveal Israel advancing through the demilitarized buffer zone, including moving its security fence further into Syrian soil, potentially creating a new buffer zone. These moves are part of Israel's broader operations in Lebanon and Gaza, according to Israeli officials. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump reiterated his administration's recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, asserting its importance for Israeli security. This position was criticized by Russia, which argued it violates in principles of territorial integrity under international law. Russia has also criticized Israel's recent airstrikes on Syrian territory as breaches of international law. Additionally, Moscow has raised concerns at the United Nations Security Council, warning of the broader regional instability resulting from Israeli incursions. Reactions from the international community remains mixed. Western nations have expressed cautious optimism about Syria's potential transition, while Russia and Iran have denounced recent developments and pledged continued support for Damascus. Humanitarian organizations have sounded alarms about worsening conditions as the conflict intensifies, urging immediate international intervention. These events highlight the complexity of the Middle Eastern conflict, involving overlapping disputes and broader geopolitical competition, with fears of region escalation if diplomacy fails.
Now, for more on this, we cross over to Hani, who's in the newsroom. Hani.
Thank you, Mark. And for further analysis on the current situation in Syria, we're joined from Cairo by the international relations expert, Dr. Ahmed Said Ahmed. Welcome to Q News, Dr. Ahmed. First off, let me ask you, Israel crosses demilitarized zone in the first public entry since 1973. So are the Israeli occupation forces expected to back off in the upcoming period of time, or will this move be the beginning of further incursions?
In fact, the occupation forces made is a violation of Syrian territory. It's taking advantage of the current situation in Syria, and it's considered a crime based on the international law and a violation of sovereignty of the state according to the UN. Also is violating the disengagement agreement in 1974, and therefore poses a real threat to the Syrian sovereignty that's expressed in the far-right current that do not respect the international law, any legal considerations or ethical considerations, and so is there continuing of such violations. And I think that the occupied forces won't stop at the occupied territories or the buffer zone, but they will continue. Beside the violations related to the successive airstrike against a military Syrian target, exploiting the withdrawal of the Syrian army from their position in order to dismantle Syria and to achieve more of Israeli objectives that aren't relevant to the international law or the international agreements and conventions.
Then what are the implications of the Israeli aggressions on international conventions and norms? And are we witnessing different Israeli strategies this time around?
Certainly, there are serious repercussions due to the actions of the occupying territories of more theft of more territories that would ignite the conflict of the Middle East and the conflict between Israel and Syria. And it also would generate more instability in the region. And I believe that Israel's strategy now is asserts that it has a great role of the incidents upheld in Syria related to igniting turmoil and any similar matter. And I think that it represents a great violations that took place in the Syrian territories. And I think that this strategy is based on flaming Syria, and it is also citing through the statement of the Benjamin Netanyahu that the Assad is playing the fire, and also reflected the orientations of Israel and the equations in the region. Assad by Netanyahu upon the flood operation to disseminate the turmoil and the disability in the region, as well as igniting fires.
Sir, now Egypt has reaffirmed its support for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. How can Egypt's commitment to supporting Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity influence regional stability and international diplomacy as a whole?
Certainly, the Egyptian stand was very clear and crystal, and rejecting what has taken place by the Israeli forces, and affirmed in an official statement on the importance of the sovereignty of Syria and the integrity of its territories, and the rejection of all violations by Israel to the UN Convention and the agreement signed of the disengagement by the Russian and American guarantee. And I think that Egypt now is playing a real and a very effective role in confronting these Israeli plans to exploit the incidents in Syria for more expansion, for igniting fires. And I think that Egypt, as respecting the international laws, so Egypt now is moving regionally and internationally on the UN to expose these crimes against Syria and its people, and to abort what is made by Israel, along with its partner, for the withdrawal of such territories that would represent a great event and in another respect of sovereignty. And I think what is made by Israel also poses question around the American stance, particularly the USA is a guarantee of the agreement of 1974, but what is made by Israel might be taking place by the green light of the US But the Egyptian diplomacy is supporting the Arab causes and the Syrian sovereignty and rejecting what's all been done by the Israeli occupied forces on the Syrian borders.
Well, regarding the upcoming emergency UN Security Council meeting, will it yield special arrangements for Syria?
I think that we cannot rely as much on the UN Security Council to play a positive role regarding the Syrian crisis, as well as the Israeli aggression on the Syrian territories, because of the contradiction and the interest of the great powers such as the USA and Russia. They are fully engaged in the Middle East, and both of them have the right of using of veto, and it is expected not to issue a resolution to condemn Israel or to impose Israel to sit back of such violations. And also there is no the non-consensus is also present, so we're not actually expecting any things that will go in favor of supporting Syria or with respect to the Israeli violations.
Well, sir, given the unfolding events, what sort of potential scenarios do you foresee for the Syrian factions?
I believe that Syria is today at a real test, as there was an agreement between all the Syrian factions on a common goal, which is toppling the Bashar al-Assad regime, and now the regime has fallen. But we are before challenges that would witness contradictions between the Syrian armed factions, particularly regarding the future of Syria and the form of the current regime currently in place in Syria. There are suspicion about going for a regime of an Islamic ideology, and of course in fact there is a non-consensus, but it is a fear that this consensus would prompt challenges in light of the difficult circumstances and the economic problems and crisis, and as well as the Israeli incursion. So it is very important for the factions to agree upon, based on establishing a civil state, writing a new constitution, and building the Syrian army in protecting the Syrian territories. Therefore, it represents a great challenge before the different Israeli factions.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the international relations expert, Dr. Ahmed Said. Ahmed, thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on Q News. And now we move back to Mark in the studio once again. Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hani. Well, that brings us almost to the end of our bulletin. Let's have a recap of the headlines. Israel asserts control over the Syrian Golan buffer zone and operates a multi-front military strategy. The Syrian flag flies over Syria's embassy in Moscow as leadership changes quickly unfold. And the UN Security Council meets today for urgent talks on Syria's stability. Well, that's all for our bulletin this hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNews EGY to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.